All right, I think it's 4 o'clock. Shall we start? All right. Thanks, everyone, for coming. My name is Jeff Hahn. I'm a relatively new employee here at Microsoft, actually. Welcome to this session. We're really excited to be here in our new home and present to you some early insight in where we're going with Multitouch Inc. And Pen since the acquisition and since we have a little bit more visibility into what our plans are. For those of you that don't know, I was a founder of a company called Perceptive Pixel. We've been around since 2006. Ever since that, we founded the company shortly after that TED video, that TED demo where we showed up Multitouch in 2006. We just got acquired in July, and we're actually a pretty unique company in that we're a hardware and software company. We do develop our own hardware from scratch. We have a very large facility here that does the manufacturing in Portland, Oregon, and we're expanding that quite a bit, along with a large amount of software that we actually relocated from New York over here to Redmond, and we also have a large group in Silicon Valley. What's really interesting about the acquisition is that we were integrated into the Microsoft Office division, and for those of you that don't know, it's actually really the smartest part about this acquisition. Microsoft Office is actually the information worker, knowledge worker division of Microsoft. It's the one that tasked with and chartered with developing actually the applications, not the OS, but actually the scenarios and the applications that run on top of it. And again, particularly for the knowledge worker, because as a company, Perceptive Pixel, Multitouch has, of course, proliferated all around the consumer and entertainment and personal domains, but our company from the very beginning was always about what it's like for multi-touch and advanced user interfaces, how it would benefit the knowledge worker, how it would impact us on how to get real work done. And that agenda has aligned perfectly with the Office division, and we're really excited in our new home and really excited about what we're about to do next, because the agenda just hasn't changed. We now have the backing of a $100 billion company behind us to actually achieve the same exact visions that we had as PPI, and I'm very excited. That video that's playing underneath is also another telling point. It's that future productivity vision videos you might have seen before. Again, this division is the one that's chartered to actually make scenarios like this actually realized. We'll do our own software, we'll do our own hardware if necessary. And so that's what's really exciting about this. So you'll see PPI referenced a few times as we integrate, but it's the best way to call our group right now. We're a new business unit inside MOD, and it's really exciting. Let's go over a few market trends about what's actually going on in the ecosystem right now. We don't need to actually say this, but touch is now a fundamental requirement. All devices are really expected to have these kind of capabilities, not just your mobile device, but indeed almost everywhere there's computing, people are now pretty much expecting touch, and you now have support from all the major players, of course, including ourselves. Fundamentally, as part of the operating system, we all know about Windows 8, completely reimagined for touch, not just trying to getting a mouse emulation working in the Win 7 shell, but indeed, there's a lot of stuff changed in Win 8 that supports not just touch, but is actually laying the groundwork for some other things in the future as well. The display industry is also in a really interesting place. As a friend of mine likes to put it, it's a $100 billion not-for-profit industry. They're losing money left and right. So they're desperate to try to get display technology into new domains. Right now, the TV market is saturating out 3.01 TVs per household. That's in the US. Broader, it's a little bit lower. Nevertheless, basically, they're running out of places to sell these things. So need to figure out new markets, and actually, it's really exciting for us because we can piggyback off of that. The display industry they do some amazing things. They really turn sand into these amazing transparent structures that actually display millions and millions of pixels. Things that literally, if you know how they do it, it's really incredible. The problem is, the traditional metrics for what a display is good for has pretty much saturated out. They're pretty much all good enough in terms of resolution, gamut, brightness, all the other metrics that the TV people are used to. So again, they're trying to figure out where can we put these displays. Now, fortunate for us, and they're also really interesting. They kind of have this herd mentality. Every year they come up with something that says, oh, this is the next big thing. And so for example, one year was thin backlights and thin industrial design, which is great. And then the entire industry went on that, and they spent an enormous amount of energy to make these super thin TVs. Great. What's next? After that, they kind of got into 3D. Kind of saw that train wreck actually happening from a distance. Didn't really think it was going to be something interesting. So So there was an enormous amount of energy making 3D displays. And again, not too much success there. Fortunately, right now, we're in the midst of the display industry really now kind of hung up on big displays, which is really cool. So you're starting to see these larger displays. And what I mean by large, the display industry defines large as beyond 10 inches. We define it as something beyond 30 inches, 30, 50, 80, 100-inch type devices. You might have heard about the term UHD, Ultra HD. They're now really actively working on 4K by 2K displays, film resolution. The funny thing about that is that's actually not interesting enough for the home consumer. Not only is there isn't any content or distribution mechanism for it, but indeed, it's actually not that necessary. When you're actually sitting at a TV distance, you actually don't need that resolution. For most cases, an HD display is actually Retina display for a home audience. So UHD is not enough. Fortunately, we do have a place to use them, and that's in enterprise. And when you're actually putting up synthesized or rendered content, it's actually great to have more pixels and more resolution. So indeed, we have some market forces that are helping us drive these kind of displays into enterprise. Now, when you have new form factors, you do need new input devices to go along with it, new modalities, and that's what's really exciting. In order for this stuff to succeed, when you think about a near-term future with displays like this, which is an 82-inch display, when you have walls like that that's along the corridor there, you can't think of them as being attached to arrays of keyboard and mice. You have to think about other modalities in order for these new form factors and new displays to succeed. The other thing that we've learned from over the last 10 years or so is that customers really need a full solution. You can't just give them hardware and expect an ecosystem to just develop out there. This stuff is actually pretty complex. You really need to integrate together hardware and software and perhaps even some services to go along with it. Win 8, we're really coming at the right time where Win 8 has been reimagined for touch, but there's also a lot of other stuff ready. Cloud services, when you start having to think of the large device not on its own, but how they connect to all the other devices that you might have, your mobile, your slate, your PC, then you start really thinking about that it's critical to have cloud services, not just for storage and discovery of the other devices, but indeed the cloud will start to actually do compute and other forms of connectivity between them. And finally, besides the OS and cloud, you really do need the applications. One thing we've learned as a small company is even though we made the most fantastic hardware, the next question was, what do you do with it? And we actually struggle a lot, actually. We provided an SDK. We hoped an ecosystem ISVs like yourselves would develop. And there was definitely some of that. But we realized that you really need to provide the consumer with a base class of first-party software also to go along with it. And that's really one of the reasons why we're now part of Microsoft. It's really exciting because customers do need that full solution, not just the OS, not just the services, but indeed entire software to go along with it. And that's something really important to note. The other thing that's really nice right now is that people finally recognize, this wasn't the case 6 years ago, that high-fidelity touch really matters at this point. Touch is now mature enough that people can discern a crappy solution from another. In the early days, it was a little bit of a wild, wild west, and there are various kind of marketing gimmicks that tried to just latch on to touch and say, oh, we have touch also, we have multi-touch, and there was this whole kind of confused ecosystem. At this point, it's matured nicely enough that I think consumers can now really discern and really will demand high-quality solutions. And if you think about what I just said before, it's not just touch hardware. We're talking about the entire experience, not just the software either, just UI design, user experience design. Customers will now be able to say, this is a crappy solution, and we're not going to adopt it. For enterprise, again, the business that our company and our now division is focused on, it's actually critical for it to be extremely high fidelity. You can't, when you're actually using touch or interactivity to actually get real work done, the user will not chance any possibility for it to be an error. If you're literally working with data, you're just not going to accept the fact that it might work sometimes, it may not work. For an artist, you won't give them a tool. They won't accept a tool that's just unreliable. So we're at that point right now where that kind of fidelity actually really matters, which is great, frankly. And in parallel to this entire thing, work today, the modern knowledge worker environment is all about collaboration. It's no longer a single personal computer experience. It's not you and the device getting work done. It's now basically a collaboration of people and a collaboration of devices that actually gets your work done. Nowadays, what I mean by that is, of course, it's a kind of collaboration where we're connected over a network and working remotely together on something. But indeed, a lot of collaboration also revolves around us being in the same room, co-located, working around a larger device like this, or two of us across a laptop on a desk. That's collaboration also. And nowadays, the modern workplace is all about how we collaborate. In parallel, there's been a lot of great maturization of AV and encoding and teleconferencing technologies. In a previous life, I actually developed online video conferencing software. I don't know if you remember See You, See Me, but back in the 90s, that was like one of the first video chat applications. It's interesting to come full circle because we've seen the progression of 4-bit grayscale postage stamp video that would move at 1 frame per second to basically HD quality. It's really exciting. All those people have commoditized out the AV. What's really missing still is that kind of rich collaboration tool experience. How do you actually work effectively together on data? Co-authoring is obviously a huge step there, but I think we can actually go further than that. So these are the kind of things to watch for and give you insight into perhaps where we're going and what kind of products are going to start to become available soon. This is an old demo video from 2009. It's the latest one that we have at this point. We've kind of been a little busy since then. It's a little election heavy, I apologize, but it was kind of right after that. By 2009, by the elections in 2008, almost every network except one was using our technology to break down the elections live, and indeed, this is what most folks know us for. It's actually, we're really proud of this work. It's not a huge part of our business. It never was. It, of course, gets disproportionate media coverage, so everyone thinks that's what we do. But indeed, it's a tiny part of the business. But we're really proud of it because this is actually a really mission-critical environment. When you're on air and TV, this stuff cannot fail. The hardware cannot fail. The software cannot fail. And indeed, the user interface cannot fail for the user here. What's really interesting about this is that John King there trained for 20 minutes before just going in front of a national audience live on air for the first time. That's what's compelling about these technologies, the fact that it's not really powerful, it's not really meant to make impact for geeks like us to be able to use devices like this, in other words, experts. It's really interesting how it empowers the knowledge worker whose job isn't to know how to use a computer. And that's what's most compelling about scenarios like this. When an ordinary layperson who understands the data wants to be able to use it as an effective communication tool, again, to collaborate, and in this case, be able to disseminate the information more broadly. But if you think about it, what John King is doing here is not too far off from what a teacher needs to do or what a 4-star general needs to do when giving a mission briefing, or to any one of us might do in a design review or a charrette. That's what's interesting about these kind of large display scenarios. And of course, we've dabbled in some comedy also as well. So, what's great about this video is that somebody needs to keep, that's how the system works. So satire is how you keep the broadcasters in line and the media in line. Anyway, these other parts of the video are kind of what you would almost traditionally expect from a company like ours. We've kind of dabbled in many vertically oriented fields like medical imaging, oil and gas, energy, any place where these kind of, first of all, they're early adopters of technology like this, and we've really done some great work in cutting our teeth and trying to figure out what are the best multi-touch modalities for a lot of data types, like 3-dimensional data sets, like volumetric data sets with a cutting plane, like 2-dimensional medical imagery. Again, all with the mission of trying to figure out how is this productive for the user. We're not a company that was about shallowness, about something that just would evaporate because it's a fun gimmick, but something that actually can have measurable return on investment for a user because you can measure how much faster or how much higher quality the work is that they're doing. Of course, we're excited about these kind of classic scenarios also, large information walls, knowledge worker, power wall type things, where it's just useful to have lots and lots of screen real estate, right? When you think of productivity scenarios, what do you think about? You think of meeting rooms, you think of conference rooms, you think of design charrette sessions with post-it notes everywhere on a large board, you think of just copious amounts of blackboard or whiteboard space. It's no coincidence that you think of, when you think of productivity and knowledge workers, you think of larger display areas. And again, we have all the right things happening where you have industry trends and market trends all making this stuff real very, very soon. This is actually a really a neat application, something we did for the TED conference in 2007. At the time, they actually had 2 sketch artists actually sketch out every talk as it was going on, and it allowed you to walk up to this kind of kiosk and allow you to rearrange some key ideas from each of the talks and kind of make your own story out of them. It was pretty neat. And you can see the kind of rich set of interfaces and modalities that we've explored throughout the app. We've also done a lot of core interaction research, literally some fundamentals on the best ways to manipulate textures on a 3D mesh. You can think of this as something that allows you to kind of manipulate texture on the surface and not work in the inverse UV space, if you guys know what that means in the CGI pipeline. This was some great work we did on how do you manipulate the layering problem in a 2.5D context. Traditionally, you think of that bring to front, send to back type thing. There, we were using pressure to be able to slip things over and under each other. This was some great work on, again, a cutting plane in a 3D environment. What is the best widget that allows us to manipulate that kind of data set? It's a good way to think about the work we do. It was data set oriented because that exact widget could be useful not just for the CAD/CAM application you saw there, but also for medical imaging or oil and gas, because it turns out that a lot of volumetric data sets like that exist in a lot of domains, and it's great to solve that problem once and be able to reapply it to all the others. We don't do very many public exhibitions, but again, we're not focused on museums or trade shows or places like Disneyland or stuff. But it is fun to watch a massively multi-user environment. There's no strict controls here that kind of prevent and solve the multi-user problem there. We find that most of the time social norms just kind of kick in there, and so you kind of have a natural enforcing of how multi-user works to have multiple people working there. So anyway, so our vision, Microsoft and Office really has a really clear vision of how productivity in the future is going to happen, and it's across multiple devices. We're coming in also at an interesting time where we don't think of computing anymore as something that's necessarily fixed to a device. So don't think of this as another just PC that's driving this wall. It's kind of the old school way of thinking about it. The new model really is about connected multiple devices where each of us actually interact with multiple devices, and in turn, multiple devices interact with us. This actually is really powerful. And again, it's kind of the forefront of where computing is going, and of course, how productivity is going to happen, and also how devices like this really need to work in order for them to be contributive to productivity in the future. Let me take a minute to show you what this product actually is here. This is our flagship 82-inch multi-touch display. It's really exciting. We've been shipping this for about a year and a half now, actually. Pretty exciting. It's the world's largest projected capacitive display. I'll get into that in a minute. And it runs Win 8 really, really nicely here. That's what's really exciting about this, and we'll get into this a little bit more in the talk. Because Win 8 has been redesigned for touch, what's actually really surprising to me is how well it even works unmodified just on larger scales like this. So, of course, you have your tiles here, and you can, I'm going to have to, of course, bring up the canonical map demo. But it's pretty neat because all of a sudden we now have some really good groundwork to actually, and real OS support on supporting these kind of interactive apps from the ground up. Previously, I'm sure you guys are familiar with this, had to do some hacks in order to do this well and interact with a shell. Certainly before Win 7, it was a real pain in the ass because you would fight with the shell. And even in Win 7, it wasn't quite enough there. But right now, Win 8 really has all the great affordances necessary to actually make this a first-class data type and a first-class experience. Not to mention the App Store, all these other things, even IE. It's really great because you have this nice rendering engine now that allows you to do a fractional zoom and do all the other nice things that you expect. It's not just about kind of the input processing. It's about all the other pieces that are there, a rich, fast graphical pipeline, all the other kind of toolkits that are there. When you think of touch, you can't think of touch literally as just touch. We're talking about a full interactive high-performance experience that revolves a lot about direct manipulation, right? So that's what's really exciting about this. I could actually show you. I'll geek out for a little minute here. This is really great state-of-the-art hardware. I'll get into that in a minute. This is true multi-touch, capacitive, hundreds of touches at a time. And what I'll get into later is that it also does stylus simultaneously as well. We get that really important because we're not just interested in touch. Our division is actually interested in how more advanced devices and interactivity is going to actually contribute to the knowledge worker experience. But again, state-of-the-art hardware. This is literally the best hardware in the field. It's coated with a 2-millimeter thick piece of Gorilla Glass. It's not necessary to have that for this kind of durability. We're not doing this in outdoor environments. Yet we do it because you need you need to minimize the parallax as much as possible. So you might say, well, we've seen these large screens before, smart boards, whatnot. Somebody in the audience just came up to me and said, yeah, we just bought a kind of 65-inch infrared panel. Well, there really is a big difference here, and that's why we're really optimistic about how touch is going to take off in the large scale in a way that hasn't been before. Most of the time when you think of these large devices, you think of smartboard. Those things work by having a camera on the corner of the screen along the bezel. They try to kind of look down the line on the surface of the display and to really look for your finger as it approaches and triangulate the position. It's a really cheap and commoditized approach, but you got some real problems with it. The biggest problem actually is what they call pre-touch. It can't actually distinguish true touch from a very slight hover. And indeed, that becomes really disturbing to the user. It's not something that shows up well on a spec sheet, but if you ever use a smartboard and then kind of walked away saying, I don't like it, I don't know why, that's actually probably the issue, the fact that it doesn't actually connect and register touch when your brain thinks it's touching something. And that's really bad. And it's one of the reasons why these kind of large screens have only kind of reached a novelty phase and been used in very limited environments rather than actually really taken off in enterprise. There are all sorts of other issues along with it. It's not even true multi-touch. One of the problems here, unfortunately, this technology really took off with Win 7 devices also. And unfortunately, this is the kind of problems you have. Because you have only 2 cameras, you really can't disambiguate the 2 fingers exactly. So literally, this is our software trying to run on it, and you literally get things like rotation reversal, and it's just terrible. That's actually really bad because it's literally doing the opposite of what the user wants. You also, because of having that kind of pre-sense problem, the driver clips off the data when your finger approaches and takes off. That's also why you have that subtle gesture recognition latency that people say, well, it's not that responsive. It's because the data is so bad, they literally have to clip it off in order for the recognizer to do something with it. And when you do that, you have more latency, and then the recognizer doesn't really recognize that you're doing a drag or a rotation until well into it. And again, little subtle things like that are a problem. And we're not going to permit any of these devices with Win 8. Similarly, in the large scale, you have devices that utilize infrared LEDs across the top and sides. And again, this is the kind of data that you actually get. You can't actually discriminate these 2 fingers from the other 2. They call that ghost points or whatever. But basically, they're projections of the data of your fingers along each axis, and you literally have massive ambiguity. So again, when you try to run software here, it just is a bad experience. Now, fortunately, again, all that's changing. So kind of cast away your kind of previous notions about large-scale touch experiences, because this stuff is now the real thing, and it's what's about to happen. So this device, as I mentioned, is based on a technology called projected capacitive. It is now the standard for how all mobile and slate devices work. It's called mutual capacitance, ProCap, PCAP. You might see it advertised a little bit as 10-finger touch. This is the kind of technology that now is starting to be available on these larger scale sizes. Again, completely the standard. And the reason why it's important to acknowledge that it's a standard, there are about 20 different touch technologies out there, and they're all, about 5 years ago, they were all trying to compete for the mobile and slates. Some of you might be familiar with resistive. A lot of other people were working on these things, but capacitive basically won. The reason why it's important to kind of acknowledge that is because people are now used to that feel, that whole zero force kind of capacitive field. That basically is what you have to now write to. And again, developers are now, and the gesture recognizers and everything are now really used to processing that kind of sensor data. So really, you can't run an app that was kind of designed for a slate and all the gestures there. You can't expect that to run on these large devices if they're based on a different technology. So if we can get capacitive to work on a larger scale, then we literally have a unified approach to touch across every scale of devices. And that's what we have here. I kind of skipped over this fact. Capacitive was never thought to be able to scale beyond 10 inches just a few years ago. And that's actually the big breakthrough that we came up with. Why is it hard? Well, it actually was, just, again, not thought to be able to work beyond slates, and people were working on different approaches. But the innovation that we came up with was to try to get that same zero force experience across the entire range of devices. So this is what we have. We designed our own chip that literally is able to pass. We don't actually have a logo qualification standard for devices over 30-inch, but this device would pass all those things. So this is basically a slate style and performance controller that scales all the way up to 80 inches and beyond. It's hundreds of points of touch. You can see what's also really neat here is that we actually capture the full imaging information on the device. So it's not just kind of, the fundamental primitive is not X or Y coordinates. It's actually almost surface-like an entire image of data. And the reason why that's important is because on larger devices, it's actually really important to understand to try to process palm rejection and your arm and other things that might get in the way. So you really need to have all this rich information you see on the device and process that up in order to actually provide a good experience for the user. So we keep mentioning parallax a few times. Parallax is probably also the single largest source of UI errors and mishits that's due to hardware at least. Again, I mentioned the smartboard before. When you're implying direct manipulation, which is what most of these touch interfaces are about, you got to present to the user you're actually touching the device. But if you actually have a giant air gap or parallax between the device and between the visuals and your finger, it's just not going to work out. Indeed, this is the most competitive 22-inch monitor, and you can see the kind of disparity between the image plane, which is kind of well into here, and the top surface is about 6 or 7 millimeters. Again, largest source of errors actually when you're actually touching the screen. These larger devices, the older style ones that I've talked about before, there's both kinds of parallax. There's a kind of physical barrier parallax where you're trying to touch screen and there's a big gap there. There's also a more nefarious one, an invisible one, that's really about the fact that it senses your finger invisibly above the tactile sensation, and again, it's even more of a cue conflict for the user. So all those reasons are actually the reason why these devices haven't taken off. But now we have it. But now that we have it, I will actually be the first person here to say touch also sucks. There's no perfect touch technology, but what I mean is that there's about, again, 20 different touch technologies. Each one has some pros and cons to it. But as Bill Buxton likes to say, everything is best for something, worse for something else. There are just some interface modalities that are appropriate in some situations and maybe exactly be the worst for another. There's some, I hope, well-known challenges. I hope you guys are well aware with the challenges of touch. You have the fat finger problem. Basically, you're trying to interact with the device with a very blunt instrument. We're all used to very fine single cursor type interfaces, but touch, of course, doesn't give you that. You have the Midas touch problem, which is the colloquialism for not actually having the hover state or tracking state. So you really have to obviously rethink your interfaces for that. One of the bigger issues you have is you can't tell the differences between touches. In other words, I can't tell that two touches are from my left hand and my right hand, or that I use my left hand to pick something in the palette, and my right hand is actually I want to drag or manipulate the interface with. That actually directly just leads to modality issues, and Nathan will get into that in a minute. And to be honest, it does get tiring after a while completely using touch. You really have to think about friction and other kind of kinematics involved. So in summary, it's great for content manipulation and it's great for consumption, but it's actually not so much for content creation. So what's next? Our group is not multi-touching. We're not trying to just force feed multi-touch down everybody's throat. Our group will invent what we need to do to solve this UI problem. So can anybody guess what's next? Is it this? It's a great science fiction piece, I guess, but there are a lot of things in this movie that actually were really much more for the benefit of storytelling than it was for actual interaction design. Human factors just tells us right away that this is the human body. We're just not that precise enough to actually hold our hands up with any kind of precision to actually get real work done. Now, I just want to be clear, that doesn't mean there are other valid scenarios. Kinect is great, and we do some great entertainment things with it. But if we're talking about productivity and knowledge worker, it's really not great to use this kind of gesture tracking for explicit commands. It's really not, we're just physically not well suited for that. It's like the difference between playing a violin where you're pushing against something versus a theremin where you kind of have this great vague kind of experience where you kind of use your ears, your eyes for the feedback loop rather than touch itself. So people get inspired by this movie. It's fantastic. It's great to actually think there's something beyond the keyboard and mouse, and that's probably one of the best benefits that this movie has impacted us by. But there are a lot of things wrong with this movie. I mean, for instance, transparent displays. Watch your contrast ratio go down. I mean, there's no point of a transparent display. The only point of a transparent display is so that the director of this movie can actually put the camera right there so you can actually see, the actor, and that's great, but it's not really an effective UI. So what is next? You've been seeing me hold this the entire time. We believe the next really big thing is simultaneous touch plus stylus. Now, we've seen touch before. We've seen pen computing before. That stuff has been around for a long time. But we're literally in a great 1 + 1 = 5 situation when you actually combine the two together. It's very, very compelling. We're not talking about either or. We're talking about what happens when a device has both. You actually really design software that actually uses both simultaneously. This is just a very, very trivial app that we wrote that just showcases just how well this fits the way we work and how our brain operates. My left hand, the non-dominant hand, is just mapped to manipulating, very traditionally, the kind of pan, zoom, rotate, or rotail, scale, translate thing that you do on a multi-touch canvas. And the right hand is just holding the tool, and in this case, and operating. In this case, just inking. Of course, it could be cutting. It could be doing a bunch of other things. But you'll notice there's just no mode switches there. I don't have to keep switching between the move tool and the cut tool. You kind of it actually is the closest thing to just watching the interface disappear, and you're just kind of immersed in the whole environment. It's actually fun. This is myself in the video. I still get a kick out of watching myself because you notice my left hand oftentimes actually kind of holding the document, even though I don't need to. That's really showing that I'm just kind of, my brain's zoned out, and it's like it just really thinks it's a physical document there. Right there. There's no reason for me I had to do that. If you had a set of other tools, you'd probably just let go of that. But it's really compelling. And again, this is literally the most obvious and well-known use case of the simultaneity of touch and pen that's been well-studied in literature and well-studied in research. It's just the way, it's just such a natural thing. And of course, when you think of productivity, you do think of stylus. So this is a real stylus. It's not a fake one. It's not like those passive rubber tip things. It actually has full subpixel resolution and all the goodies that we're all used to. It has to be. And this is the real reason why we really care about parallax, because when you're working with styluses, you really need to feel like you're drawing right on the pixels themselves. So we work really hard to make sure all of our hardware actually has that level of fidelity. And basically, again, conducive to making sure that the experience just works. Of course, it works on the larger devices as well. One of the neat things about this stylus is that it actually has identity. It has a GUID. So we can actually use the stylus from this device to the other device. And that's going to be really compelling soon, too. So again, really neat when I hold the stylus in the same hand that I'm actually going to do touch right behind it. All of those natural, I would say, gestures in a different way where you kind of hold the stylus, you do something, and then you tuck it away. All those things just work, and that's what's really cool about this. So the other thing is that I wanted to mention we are looking at other things beyond pen and touch as well. It's really exciting. For instance, I mentioned several times the idea of collaborating together. We've explored this kind of scenario quite a bit, where we have multiple devices hooked together over network, perhaps sharing exactly the same documents. One of the things we figured out really early on is when you have an object moved by the remote user, it becomes really weird to have that move without you knowing it. When you're collaborating together, you really rely on body cues and gaze awareness and the fact that I know where the person is. We've been experimenting with other things that allow you to convey that presence along with it. And it does require hardware support, but that's what's so cool about having a hardware division, because we can actually drive some of these specs. The display industry left to their own are just going to create maybe a cheaper TV. These are kind of things we really need to build in order to create really compelling experiences that will really help us get real work done and collaborate. So I have a call to action here. Again, touch will be everywhere. We expect it everywhere. Consumers expect it everywhere. But really interestingly, enterprise are starting to adopt it. That's what's really the next thing that's about to happen. particularly large-scale devices. We envision a huge, huge market for those stuff. I mean, there's no reason why devices like this shouldn't be in every meeting room, every conference room, every classroom. I mean, we're working really hard. I'm not announcing anything today, but we're working really hard to make this stuff extremely, extremely accessible. So there's going to be a large amount of hardware on this stuff soon, not just by us as well. We're working with, obviously, the ecosystem of partners to make this a reality. But we're really excited about getting these large devices everywhere. So the point is, design all your apps now for these large size displays. I did say it earlier, the Win8 apps will just run on these larger devices, but, and we're going to spend the next half of this talk talking about, you do have to think user experience, the considerations necessary for these larger scale devices. Please don't compromise on it. There really is a difference between what's designing for small and what's designing for large. Design now, again, for pen and touch. The APIs are there. Work on really using the differences between pen and touch. You can start with the most trivial approaches I showed you before, but there's a lot of, it's completely greenfield, what you can do with pen and touch together. And I encourage you to also look into the research literature. Devices are coming. We do have a mechanism for early access hardware. Please contact Mara, who's here in the audience as well, and we can do a Q&A. We also have some devices out there at Build, at the Coding for Fun, where you can actually, if you have your apps, just bring it and test it out right now on these large-scale displays. It's really, really compelling. It's really fun. But you'll see some things you just may not have realized right away once you've been developing on Slate. It's like, oh, I haven't thought of that. I haven't thought that I actually had to walk over to the other side to actually access that button. So a lot of things that we'll get into in a minute. But I hope this was exciting for you. We also do actually have a contest right now for the hardware as well. That's also at the Coding for Fun thing, right? Very exciting. And before I hand it over to Nathan Fish, who's one of our principal program managers, I want to show you this video. This was just on Friday or Saturday with each one of our 55-inch devices is there at the Windows store, at the Microsoft store. It's really cool because this stuff is just such a natural for people to get engaged with. This was a woman that clearly, it was a grandmother that clearly had nothing better to do except to actually tag along with the family while playing around the mall, and most of the technology was just oblivious to her. But as soon as she saw the map running here on our 55-inch display, it was amazing. She just gravitated right to it, knew exactly how to manipulate it to find her hometown in Tehran. And it was just really neat because there's just so much opportunity with this new class of devices and new kinds of software that's about to come out. So let me hand it over and introduce Nathan here.
So interactive, who wants one? We have so much in common. This is really good hardware. We've been doing a lot of testing, bringing people in to see what types of scenarios they want to do with it, and the fluidity is just amazing. Like, everything is so responsive. And that is huge because when you want people to walk up and just use it, whether you're in a meeting or just walking by it, it just needs to feel responsive and work like you'd expect. So I'm going to go through and talk about some of the design experiences that we think we'd like to kind of bring onto you guys when you're thinking about opportunities for the large display. First, these are suggestions. These are not guidelines. Nothing's written. We're figuring out a lot of this as we go. So we're excited to see where you guys go with this as well, and we hope you find this informative. That said, Jeff has mentioned this as well. Surprise, your app's probably going to work pretty well already. Windows 8 has done a great job of making touch a really first-class citizen, and most of the apps that we're using do work really well. And I was talking to a gentleman here, like Fruit Ninja. Yeah, it totally works awesome. It's also very fatiguing. And so we are looking at how do we address that? Like, what are smart things that we can do specifically for these large apps? So with that in mind, what we're going to cover a bit today is just talk about how we want to optimize for the large display, talking about the human factor, talking about how we can do cool things with pen and touch, gestures, interactions, and just some tips and tricks that we've been playing with. Again, not guidelines, but just things to take advantage of with the app bar. Context menus. We'll end on color before we go to some questions and answers. So this has been a really fun way to go kind of explore this new device. Obviously, this can play Angry Birds and Fruit Ninja really well. We think there's a whole range of productivity scenarios, though, that are really interesting that people are going to take a lot of advantage of. And we hope that is something that you guys are interested in, too. whether you're drawing or presenting or collaborating, this device is just something that people want to get next to. Is it a big surface or a big slate? Maybe if you hold it, this far from your head. This is the display you're going to be the closest to. And with that in mind, you're probably going to be using your whole body to interact with it. And of course, taking advantage of the fact that you can do the pen. One of the things that we've really noticed is that, and we're seeing this more with the Windows 8 apps as well, is do one thing really well. Like whether you're doing a data visualization, just focus on that and really delight that experience. And if you can do more, great, but always be really good and proud at doing something really well. Other interesting things with this device is that you're kind of a big part of the user interface, whether you're right next to it or sitting back from it. There are things that will make you tired. Jeff was mentioning, you've got to walk across the screen to do some certain things. We also noticed that, oddly enough, people are of different heights. Damn them. But it really means you need to think about where people work. The second, if I'm doing Minority Report, which is what I got to tell my family I did for years, it is fatiguing. Like the second you have to lift your arm, you're doing more motion that will seem very subtle, but if you're going to be up here for a while, it does get noticeable. And so we try to figure out, is there kind of a comfort zone? For me, it's somewhere around here where I can write really, really easily. And then I don't have to raise my arm. I don't need to bend over. Really thinking through how people use the device and how do you bring UI to people? How do you keep people from walking back and forth? My Fitbit is totally counting awesome calories for me, but it also does make me want to sit down at times as well. So thinking really smart about how people will use the device, both right up here when you're next to it, and also when you're sitting back as well. And thinking about those rooms and environments. Obviously, we have this dual projected here because this is not the greatest display for people way in the back. But typically, we get 10, 12 people in a room all gathering. Collaboration happens so differently. We get rid of the conference room table, and we work around the device. We're coming up and down. We're thinking of ways that our other devices can connect to it as well, and really complement the experience that this can do. So a few different ways that we think, if you think about how people will use it, you can make some really compelling experiences. Surprise. This is really simple, but it is really, really basic. This should be used to help create things, and this should be used to manipulate. I've been doing it this entire talk. I don't need to switch modes. I can go through. I can zoom out. I can zoom back in. This is what we kind of do. Like with paper, we can move things around. This is something that's very, very simple. It's also really unique to what Windows can do. Other app platforms don't let you take advantage of the fact that it knows that this is a stylus and this is a hand. Now, we've been testing some of this stuff for a while. A few years ago, we had to beg and almost like push people up to say, no, this is a touch display, come and use it. Now, if you go to something like CES, you'll see signs and things saying, actually, this one isn't a touch display. That world has changed, thank goodness. What we are noticing, though, is that this is a new tool. And we just have little guided things saying, pick up the stylus to begin. People will look for it, pick it up, and it almost seems like common sense. It's a very quick learning curve. But like Jeff said, we're all the experts that have seen this. We know what happens. We know what to do. Think of those people, like the lady at the store there, who just kind of came up and started using it. Would she know to pick up the stylus, and what could it do for her? The reason we think that's really important is that if you don't kind of indicate that you have pen and touch, you have to get into things like mode switches. Mode switches can be good, but for the most part, we find them. Or silly, that's another one. C is all interactive. But the fact that I don't need to go hunt and peck to change this UI to say, now this is pen mode, now this is draw mode, now this is pen mode, now this is manipulate mode. Really, really simple and really, really core and fundamental to what we're doing. It's really important. So the other thing is about just the gestures and interactions. There's a lot of things that you can do with gestures, and I think Windows 8 really does give you some really good basics of what you can do. Just going back to the home screen here, I can pan, I can go and pull this off and move it around. I can zoom. These are all kind of universal things. Like if I use almost any device, these types of things are all kind of very common. And those are really nice things to build off on. There are some things that we've noticed that people do that you should keep an account for is that on your slate, you might be using your thumbs or your index finger. You will notice people use their full hand or 3 fingers or 2 fingers to move around. And there's probably some smarter things that we can work on to help account for the fact that people will kind of come up and brush the display differently than they may interact with on their slate or smaller device. So just thinking through that, again, Windows 8 gives you a lot of great things to play with. And when it's familiar, it's better. Like again, just like single finger to pan is kind of a universal truth to things that we've used from our phone to slates and now, of course, to displays like this. When it's familiar, it helps people who walk up in the store instantly know that they can kind of pinch and zoom a map. But also provide feedback to the user. I'll just go back to the screen here again. If you don't let people zoom in, provide some UI to say like, hey, I saw you, but I'm not doing anything with it. They might be sad and they might cry, but they'll get it. They're not going to sit there being like, is the system listening to me? There's a lot of confidence that instills when you just give that little bit of feedback. And that's actually pretty easy to do. If you want to go and do some crazy stuff with gestures, the only thing I would kind of say is that you can do your own gesture library, but really optimize for things on the large screen. You want to keep those gestures really, really simple. There's some cases where I can come over here and do my Vanna White mode and then run back. You really want people just kind of do some quick flicking gestures. That's really easy to do. And then also start accounting for multiple finger gestures and also multiple users. So purposely now, I'll do this one. This device does introduce one interaction that is cool and also can be a little bit complicated. And this is really great for two people to stand next to. Typically, most of our apps and experiences, maybe except Fruit Ninja, is really designed for you to kind of work and have two fingers, a set of hands working on here. But this can physically have two people working next to each other. And so one example I'll kind of show here, just to jump out of this app, is this cool little Mars rover app. We'll dive into that. And now we're on Mars. And so very easily, I can kind of flip through this. I can tap on to learn more information. And now two people, one person could be reading this while the other person is still manipulating. And so it seems really simple to do. Some of the things you should be just conscious of if you want to get more advanced apps, maybe data visualization where somebody's manipulating charts and graphs, is what happens when the system starts seeing events that happen across thresholds. Maybe I'm trying to zoom out here, but I've actually got two modes. It doesn't happen all too often, but the more complex you make your app, there is one of those considerations you need to figure out. How do you give UI to people so they know what's going on in each area? But typically, most apps do a really good job, and typically what Windows does is just look for the touch it saw first and respond to that. But you can do some really cool multi-user experiences, and it is very inviting on this wall for multiple people to come up to and do. The one thing we've noticed, though, is that there are some limitations. In the future, we definitely want to see a lot more things in the modern world where we can do simultaneous pen and touch. Today, what Windows does is that when it sees the pen in range, it'll actually block touch from happening. So here, I can't move anything here because it's basically helping me compensate for the fact I might write against the wall like this. So for right now, that is a limitation just to be aware of. But there are some interesting tricks and hacks you can do if you want to get crazy with holding and maybe doing a slice gesture, things like that. And maybe playing off of those things that where you see touch ahead of ink stroke as well. But in usability, even though this is a device that most people can get to, people seem to just take turns naturally. It's like, well, here's the pen for you. You seem to be drawing. I won't touch the screen. And so while it is a bit of a limitation, there's actually a lot of social norms that really kind of help make this work today quite easily. The other one is about zoom. I'm going to jump back to the map demo. But basically, the one thing to consider is that zooming can be nauseous. So it's not very enjoyable when you're right up here. And so if you're going to be doing zoom, there are definitely cases where it makes sense. But we think it's really good to zoom in kind of smart ways. Here, for example, I can quickly jump out and jump back in. And I won't invite somebody up here to view this with me. But you might get the idea that if I'm doing this and I'm only a few centimeters from this, this can be a little bit agitating to the eyes, and especially after long times of use. So what we've kind of discovered is that when you can do things like snap points, like zoom into smart ways, really helps the system feel a lot more enjoyable to use. And typically, you don't want headaches after you use it as well. So use zoom responsibly. Semantic zoom is definitely a nice way to kind of keep users feeling comfortable the entire way. This one was interesting. When we were actually using some prototypes we were playing with and looking at apps in the store, is that we kind of found, and this is to polarize maybe the experience, is that there's kind of a mode where you're editing and a mode that you're going to be presenting in. Right now, I'm obviously presenting. But if I was just to come up here and zoom this a little bit better, let's go here. I'm all over the place now, aren't I? Let's do it this way. So here we've got the standard app bar, and we've got all the controls on the side here. But when I'm in front of the display and wanting to edit and manipulate, I'm having to kind of hunt and peck for the commands that I need. A simple solution could be just to put those commands in the middle so they're actually easier for me to reach, and I don't need to jump to one side of the screen or the other. Now, ironically, the flip side to that is when you go into things where you have a presentation mode, where you've noticed me go back and forth across the screen as well. And typically in a mode like this, you could optimize the commands. It could be as simple as just having forward and back buttons here, so I can actually tap forward and tap back. You can see that this app does little things here where I can go forward or forward here, and I can go back over here. Now, on my thumbs, that makes perfect sense on a display of this size. Again, I'm kind of taxing myself to walk back and forth. So here, maybe if you have a mode where you're going to present out, you can just duplicate that UI. Again, the most common commands. And we've seen like up to 3 kind of looks well. It doesn't get too cluttered of what users do. And you could put it in the app bar. You could do some ghosty UI that they do here. It's all about thinking about how do you keep users kind of in place and in control, and without looking silly to go do something very obvious like pan the board ahead. Now, the top app bar is another interesting area. If you remember earlier on, we had those circles that kind of indicated what people's comfort range was. Regardless of your height, the top bar is really one of the harder things to reach. And so if you need to use it, and typically we kind of look at it for apps you're going to have kind of inter-app navigation. So if I come here, I can go through the different pages. IE does a really good job at making these bigger. So if you're going to have the top app bar, at least it's easier to reach. But just keep in mind that you're probably doing the most taxing thing of having to lift your arm, flick it down, and then tap to what you're navigating to. So we've been trying to see if we can avoid it or find other ways to get around that. Obviously, there's some really good reasons to use it. Just keep in mind that you're going to be asking your users to do probably the most strenuous thing that you could do, which again, every now and again, isn't going to be horrible to do. If it's something primary, people probably get tired quite a bit easier. Context menus are also another really interesting thing to take advantage of. A lot of the apps that you're using today do have the app bar that you can flip up to bring commands. If you go to something like OneNote, though, that's got its own type of commanding system as well. First off, again, another good app where you've got pen and touch. And instead of me having to hunt and peck for the commands I need, I can just kind of tap on what I need to do and tap again. And here, there's a few different ways you can bring up the context menu. There's radial style, or also the more standard Windows list style as well. Radial is really good if you have more complex commands that you need to dive into. For most apps that we've been working with as well, sometimes even just a regular Windows context menu is helpful. But the benefit here is that I don't need to go hunt and peck for the app bar, which again is down here on the other side of the screen. And no matter where I am, we can make it really easy to invoke that and work with it as well. Bringing those sets of commands is one of those ways you can do things really fast and fluid. And what we've noticed is that people can be writing and tapping and doing different commands very, very simply. It's a great, powerful way to keep people focused on what they're doing. Because again, one of the things we've noticed is that your periphery is quite a bit different here. Even if you had the app bar, let's get that going. It might not even be in your field of view of what you could do, or you have to kind of step back to get a sense of what's going on. So doing that context menu is a great way to keep people focused on the tasks that they're doing and to get things done a lot faster. The last thing we're going to talk about is color. And this is an area that, in hindsight, was super obvious and took us a lot of time to kind of go play through. Color of your app, the background especially, will play a huge role in how people will use the screen. I'm actually just going to go into a demo, and you guys can kind of digest the text a little bit later. Now, usually when we do this in our space, it's a little bit of a smaller room, so you won't get the full effect. But this is white, and it is very bright. We call it retinal bleaching. It is something that is very intense. And if you're standing at a board with a blank page, which seems very obvious, you will get headaches. It will be just, you want to sit down, you won't want to use the system. Even though the touch is great, the pen is great, you physically will not really like using a big blank white canvas. So we went to black. Black, and if you're sitting up close, what we notice with black is that you can start to notice the fingerprints, the smudges, all the things that happen on all our displays. It just feels a little bit stranger when it's up here. So then we put on our non-designer hats, because my designers would hate me for it, and said gradients will solve everything. And what you kind of get is like, is the display broken? Like this thing, this very affordable display, like is it got some issue on it? Is it the light? Is it the glare? it just looks a little bit strange. Again, if this is how your logo looks, your brand looks, I apologize on multiple levels. So let's do patterns. This is obviously meant to be weird. Thank you. Let's make it worse. Let's zoom in. These little things are distracting and so subtle, and we struggled, and we had like a whole bunch of fun, and here we did connect the dots, and that was awesome. But there is something really simple about something you take for granted, like, hey, it's a gradient cloud. It really does kind of exemplify itself on the screen. So again, on this display, we did not solve the magic hex value that makes everyone's eyes better. But this is kind of an off-white. There's a hex value we got on the slide deck there. Much softer. Now, of course, when you go to white to this, it just feels nicer. But definitely just be aware that off-white is definitely better than pure white. And this is really good. We kind of stuck with the white background when we had a lot of text up there. So if you've got lots of text, it seems to work really, really nicely. And in the other case, we've got this one where we'd actually just kind of a softer, different version of black. And again, it kind of covers up some of the smudges you might get. But if you had a lot of text in there, it's even harder to read. But this is really great for doing drawings and doing diagrams. Very simple. So that's just a bit of the summary of the stuff that we've kind of seen. This is an awesome device to take use of. Take advantage of the fact that you can do pen and touch. Think about how people are going to use this. Do you expect them to be up here the entire time, manipulating things or working with charts and graphs or doing sketches or whatever you need to do? Will people be working back? Will they be working right up against it? And also, less is usually more. Like a lot of these apps, like people just wanted to do something really, really well, get in, get out, work with the other tools that they have access to. There's really easy ways to take what you've done with your Windows 8 apps and really kind of customize it for this. And people love working with this. We've had people come up and just say, like, this is inviting. I want this now. I want this in my home. I want this in my car. We want this in our meeting rooms, on the whiteboards that we've got in hallways. People are really excited to come up and use this. We couldn't say that a few years ago. People would say, like, that is neat, and it feels weird. We're really solving those problems. What we need to do now is have a really great set of apps that people can really take advantage and do some really cool experiences for users. So we're going to end on that and to bring up some questions. But again, stop by our Coding for Fun booth. You'll get to try out the device. Please bring your app. Give yourself a little field test. Nausea is the first one. Do you feel sick after using it? We got our contest that's going on. And I think with that, we're going to end on some questions. And there's microphones. So you guys have to stand up and walk, which we just said was fatiguing. But cool.
So you mentioned kind of moving the app buttons either to the center or over to the edge for kind of presentation mode. At what size do you start really needing to move that to the center? Because right on the tablet size, I want to move the buttons towards the edge for thumb use.
Yeah.
So have you guys kind of decided?
No. That is a question. It really, like what we've been looking at now is that with these apps, the less functionality, we've been kind of just thinking, how do you nest those apps? There could be mode switches that you need to go to. Like, there's not like one size fits all. Like, and that's like if you could switch it into modes that maybe there's a data visualization mode you go into, and then you think about the commands that you could switch into. Maybe one of these buttons is switch between the modes that you're in. There's really no magic formula, but if you have like a dedicated thing that is for presentation, definitely optimize for the modes where you can use things on the side because you're just watching. Or it doesn't necessarily have to be in the app bar. Like you could do UI tricks like they've got here, whether here I have to bring in my pen to do that. You could just have Ghost UI that's always available. In fact, I kind of think of it as like it's a small world where the little robots go like this all day. If you can kind of keep things at a good level, which could be even in like this zone here for people, that I could just kind of tap to navigate, I'm not having to hunt and peck. So there could be even different ways that you could kind of introduce navigation and commands as well. So
I think one of the main points also to reemphasize is that it isn't possible to make an app that's perfect on all the platforms exactly the same. So what you can do, for instance, is there are APIs you can query to find out the size of the device. So you can actually start, and this still requires programmer input. There's a big kind of research thread on how to actually make a retargetable interface. But right now, I think it's still acceptable to basically have codes that basically switches into different modalities for a UI based on cognizance of the size of the device.
yeah. Next.
So we talked a lot about touch and stylus. And by the way, I totally agree. I think this is the way to go, even on smaller devices. I think it's really a very natural interaction. How do you see other input devices playing? Like, for example, my firm programs for Xbox, for example, and we use also Kinect, obviously, voice and remote controls and game pads, etc., etc. And I think we'll see that coming also on PCs eventually. I mean, especially voice and no touch. So Kinect kind of thing. So are you also thinking about that? Do you see also an integration coming up?
Yeah, of course. Like definitely, like Kinect is definitely one of the more obvious things that you can just kind of put one and one together to see what you can do. Voice, I think, is all of them have really great advantages. Voice, when you get into things like keyboard on this, is probably one of the hardest things to work with. You've got the keyboard down here and your input up here. If you could speak to the system, like writing out a long query, find me China's GDP or whatever your example is, could be easier to start with voice or do commands. Again, maybe to bring things to you as well. There's definitely some interesting things there. And then devices definitely as well.
So yeah, definitely. We're thinking about all these things. Again, I think the biggest thing to take away is pen and touch, definitely a very tactical thing to do in the short term, but there are going to be more modalities coming in. One of the things I really like about speech is that it can often act as a third hand, because you often actually, even with pen and touch, use both your hands. So I'm holding this, I have the stylus here, and you kind of want to like lock down something or something. So speech is actually a perfect intermittent third hand for that. The thing to be careful about with newer devices and multimodalities is what's great about pen and touch is I think it's a nice plateau for what you can expect hardware to have out of the box in the future. And speech maybe too, because of having microphones pretty much embedded in every device. But as soon as you start requiring or really wanting to fully take advantage, and then you start of something like a Kinect, you got to think about how many devices are going to be out there in scenarios that actually have all four devices there together, right? And it is one of the most difficult tasks to make a UI that scales well across. Well, if you have this and this, it will start offering these things. That becomes a very big combinatoric set of UI that you might have to literally manually hard code for.
Yeah, not even mentioning that in terms of developer resources, this is actually taxing. I mean, it takes a long time to, when you add a new device, right? It's not double the time, but it's not the same time either, right? So you have to account for that.
And I do want to also reemphasize what you just said. We are really bullish on pen and touch across all devices, not just for large. So it's about get pen and touch working on the smaller devices. As you all know, the next version of the service, the x86 version, will have it built in. We expect it to be very, very commonplace.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
I was originally going to ask about what you think about the PixelSense technology, and I guess I think that a lot of your answers cover that. But if you have any specific thoughts about it, it would be interesting. I also wondered about what you think about what the sweet spot is for DPI at a screen like this size. I mean, you said Ultra HD is kind of coming and so forth, but I don't know how high that gets us. It doesn't really get us to paper DPI, like printing DPI yet.
So I'll answer both of those. The first one was about PixelSense or Surface 40. So I'm never going to. I'm always going to advocate more and more information about the user or about the setup into the computer. So Surface and PixelSense and Sensor and Pixel and being able to see slightly beyond the screen is huge. Surface is a very different product from this. We're optimizing, as you can tell with Pen and Touch, for a specific knowledge worker workplace. Surface was designed for a different set of markets, in their case, hospitality, retail, and things like that. PixelSense is great to be able to sense figurines and other things on display, mostly in a horizontal form factor. They're different devices and they're different markets, and as I said, there are many, many touch technologies, so there's always going to be these other kinds of modes. But I'm never going to not advocate more and more context so that the computer and the application can understand, hey, it's great. One of the great things that PixelSense can do, which this can't, is roughly know that, hey, this is my right hand because it can see the skeletal outline, a few inches off. Very compelling information. Would you make a UI that actually says, if you touch this button with the right hand, it's different from the left? Interesting.
Are you able to do orientation, by the way?
We have enough rich information about the shape of your ellipses that you can make some inferences, but of course, those are always weak information, so it's hard to actually rely on it. We really really encourage you to use styluses and to basically have that hard bit of information, knowing that it's a separate device. I mean, separate hand or finger. The next question you had was
About DPI.
on DPI. Yeah. So again, I'm really excited about where the display industry is going for our benefit. We have 4K devices in the lab. They're pretty cool. Admittedly, I'll be the first to admit, at this scale, which is about 2 meters wide, the DPI in this is about 1 pixel per millimeter. So it's pretty coarse. Looks great for you guys. For us, it's a little bit lacking. Anti-aliasing is okay, but you need to have more. So 4K is coming out soon. There are people, and I've seen them, 8K devices, which is awesome. 8,000 by 4,000. And again, there's absolutely no use for it for content consumption. It's great for what we're doing, however. So again, get the apps, and we get this whole scenario really compelling. And those devices will come. Those guys can make anything we want. It is possible to make a Retina display at this scale. Us close. It's just creating the compelling scenarios that will induce all those folks to actually create it. So I'm very optimistic, as you can tell. It's very, very cool.
Thanks.
I think I heard the answer to my question earlier, but I wanted to make sure that, so multi-stylus is not supported or any kind of stylus identification, right?
It is, actually. I forgot to mention that. So this device can do multiple styluses simultaneously. This device supports up to 4 simultaneously.
And with identification? So
With identification for each one in a globally unique way. So every stylus out there has a GUID, so that we actually are interested in modes where you actually keep the stylus with you at all times. And you can imagine scenarios. Somebody's standing wave here. So that you can imagine a scenario where you take the stylus and it's kind of it's your identity. So when you go in a collaborative session and we're marking up this thing together, that document knows it was really you that marked it up versus other people, and then you go on and work on your laptop or your desktop.
Well, that's what I was thinking. That's why I asked the question, is because if you had people working side by side,
Yep.
it might be really useful to have different styluses. You know who made what marks and so on.
That's
and so
right.
forth.
And the stylus shouldn't be such a special thing. We should imagine like your workplace, like that whiteboard has a ton of styluses there. Maybe each one latched to a different state. It's very natural to pick one up, put the other one down, just because we should be able to do that.
Hi, my company is very interested in doing simultaneous touch and stylus input, but we're still on the desktop. This is a API very specific question. Do you know if the same API support is available on the desktop for Windows 8 as it is for the Windows Store type apps?
Yes.
Yes?
Yeah, this point-to-point API is common across all those frameworks.
Oh, cool. And is that different than what's available for Windows 7 Touch?
It is different. It's pretty, and it goes pretty far deep. We can't just bolt it on the other one.
Sounds good.
Onto Windows 7, yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, sorry if I missed this earlier, but pressure sensitivity, do you have that in the display, in the stylus, both, neither?
We actually have it truly in the stylus itself. There's a real strain gauge there that gives you all those thousands of levels of pressure. But also, the fidelity of the touch is so good on this that we actually have pseudo-force information. It's not absolute force, but the strength of the signal actually maps quite well. We get about 6 bits of pressure off of that, which is pretty neat. UIs usually only need 7 levels, discrete levels, about 3 bits in order to actually utilize it. Of course, you want to have more if you're just doing finger painting all the time, but that's a very kind of analog experience.
That's fantastic, thanks.
Yep.
The simultaneous pin and touch demo you showed, is that going to have better palm rejection than just the pin is in prox on?
That's right. That's right. And that's so palm rejection, or actually would really like us to all relabel it recognition, because you can actually do things with that information there. Rejection just implies calling it away and throwing it away. There's actually a lot of rich information there. And yes, actually one of the big differences from vendor to vendor about their touch and pen solutions is how well they do palm recognition. Fundamentally, we're very proud of it because it's such a first-class scenario for us, and we spent a lot of work doing that really well. It's one of the reasons why right now Windows basically does kind of gross palm rejection by just as soon as the stylus is in range, it cuts out touch, but that's purely because hardware like this wasn't available, and that's all changing. So again, think of it beyond also palm recognition. What happens when I recognize my forearm and other things on the device? It'd be really, just think broader that way. But
Cool.
You mentioned, somebody mentioned Kinect earlier on. How about smart glass? Is that something that is going to be
Yes, there's interesting, definitely things to be inspired by what you can do with those types of connections. And we think about when you sit down, how do your devices that you're using all kind of take part. So nothing to say like roadmap wise, but when we look at those scenarios, and I am on my couch watching Xbox, there's some cool things that we think we can do here as well.
Yeah.
So
I want all you guys to think about these scenarios. For instance, besides saying that touch sucks and pen is good, I want us to expand our thinking of scenarios. When we're up here, it's great and it's interactive, but I have to be a half a meter away from the screen. If you want to participate and show me something that's wrong here or whatever, it's unfortunate that I have to ask you to come all the way up here. If we're in a meeting scenario and we have a big conference table and I'm up there doing a presentation and one of you wants to point out something, it would be really convenient if you, on your device that you already have right there in front of you, could participate, right? These are not novel scenarios, but we're at the right point where all the pieces are there for everybody to actually start really thinking and implementing these things. Because, let's just not get enamored with the capabilities of this new display. How is it really going to work in what I like to call a society of devices, or the social network of devices that we all have now? And those are really compelling scenarios I really want to encourage all you guys to explore, because that will really be some killer apps if you guys create that.
we'll take one more question, and then you guys have to go and write apps for this.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. What's that?
Yeah, how do you think this technology is going to advance towards using this at a desk? I mean, do you see essentially having flat displays on your desk rather than standing displays, or somehow to use it sitting down?
So we just in the long term, not the 1 year, 2 year plan. I mean, computing is going to be ubiquitous everywhere, on every surface. Whether it's large or horizontal or on a personal device. We decided to focus, and we think there's a lot of worthwhile energy putting into these large, relatively upright devices. Doesn't mean you can't, and we have a lot of customers taking these and putting them in other form factors. I personally think the horizontal form factor is actually really difficult because it's always upside down for somebody. Yet that doesn't mean drafting table scenarios like the one I even demoed at TED, everything are very compelling. We are making some specific strategic decisions to pursue this, and I'm sure it'll just trickle into other form factors. And yeah, we have one of our 55s set up as a drafting table. It's awesome. The palm rejection and arm rejection, you just kind of sit there and just work. It's actually pretty neat. And that scenario is we're not forgetting about that at all.
Cool. We got to run, and so do you guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Nice. Woohoo. Yay.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, identity mine. You guys are great.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
Hi.
Yeah, thank you.
Especially what you were saying.